Let's dive into this.
No, that's not sploosh.
Sploosh
Sploosh is different. Sploosh is for diving in. But
Oh, we're not diving in then.
No,
Should we just
that's-
sit here in silence?
that's more of like pogo stick, but like a really bouncy pogo stick. Like imagine the pogo sticks falling like.
That's questionable.
Maybe like okay. How about those rides that you get at like cheap fairs where like you just like sit in a ball and then they pull the ball really really far back and it's attached to like bungee cords, and they shoot it.
It's not usually a ball though.
Oh,
It's
I
like
thought
a-
you sit inside like a bally cage.
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
But
You
imagine
don't get out much, do you?
Imagine if it's imagine
In
if
the
it's
ball
that.
it's a slingshot and it goes up.
In the elastic slingshot ball, and they go.
Anyway, moving on to the actual topic of the episode.
I just want to
Rather
talk
than
about balls, to be honest.
That does not surprise me one bit. Okay, so what was last week? That was mysteries in ancient Earth, so Stonehenge, pyramids and stuff. And we ended with the Amazon rainforest. I told you that little story that I watched a video about. The guy trapped in the Amazon rainforest.
Oh yeah, and he ate his dog.
Yeah,
but he didn't eat his dog at first, and I was disappointed by it.
And then
Yeah,
you got the moment that you were waiting for. So we're sort of keeping along the theme of the Amazon-ish, and we're going to look at tribes and primitive culture in general. So to start with, I want to ask you a little question. Have you seen on YouTube the videos of like the African or Indian people, depending on what videos you watch, building like little huts and little swimming pools and stuff?
I've seen they get posted on Reddit quite a bit.
Oh,
so
do
I've
they?
not seen them on YouTube, but I've seen
Have you seen a few of them though?
some of the vids of it. Like a guy dug out like a. It's got to be. Realistically, it's got to be like 10 feet deep. 10 feet deep, and he's building stairs, and then
And he's got all he's got is like a little sharp tool to like
Yeah.
scrape the dirt off.
and then he gets candles and puts them in it and stuff.
Yeah.
Sick.
You see them like go out and get tree branches and mix mud to make clay cement, and then they make bricks out of that and stuff like that. I think the reason I mentioned that is because I think that'd be really fun to experience. Not like indefinitely. I think I'd get sick of it after a while.
What you
like,
mean, living like that?
having a period of time where you experience living like that, like building your own house, hunting your own food, like hunting fish with a spear or something like that, like a long stick that you've carved to a point. And there seems to be the fact that those videos are so popular. Also, everyone seems to have seen at least one of those videos, right? I think that seems to indicate that that's quite a common thing in terms of being fascinated by that primitive sort of culture.
It's impressive to see someone build something that would take us using a load of mechanical equipment and stuff like that
Without
with
that.
their hands.
Yeah.
It's quite impressive, cool thing to watch.
Yeah.
So
I might do it one day.
let's do it in the garden.
I don't think that'd be the same experience. Plus, I've already filled it. I've just literally in the last few months filled in that garden with
Exactly.
dirt, and I'm not digging it all up again.
Let's dig it all up right now.
Screw
Let's sack the podcast off. Let's go and dig up the garden.
just forever. That's all we'll do ever again.
How far will we get though?
How?
If we dig forever.
Well, I guess we'd just fall through the underside of the flat Earth.
Oh yeah.
So on to the sort of first main topic, because that was just like a little introduction-y
Introduction to the
topic theme
to the topic.
to something. It was an introduction to something, that's for
It's
sure.
an introduction to the way tribes live. Sometimes
Yeah,
they don't have any advantages that we have. They're
don't
surviving
have
day to day.
technology like we do, etc.
Well,
So, North Sentinel Island. This is something that, again, a lot of people have heard about, but I don't think many people... I certainly, until I did this research, there's loads of instances of people visiting there that I wasn't aware of. I just sort of thought it had been visited one or two times and people had just been attacked whenever they went there.
right.
But, so to start at the beginning, they're believed to be really closely related to some of the first humans to leave Africa. And they settled on their island around 60,000 years ago.
It's not about where Africa fits.
What?
In South America. Africa fit together with South? My geography's terrible. I'm thinking of Pangaea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine so. In a similar way to how I mentioned that we slot into Europe.
I'm trying to think about the shape of Africa and then the shape of South America, and they would fit together.
It would make sense.
But I don't know whether geographically.
They're around the same point equatorially, I think.
Okay.
Oh,
you mean longitudinally?
They're both close to the equator, is what I meant. They're both semi-close to the equator.
Are they like on either side of the equator?
I'm not sure. I don't know. They have similar culture to another indigenous tribe called the Onge, O-N-G-E. Like they have similar clothes and they have similar ways of doing things. But when the British arranged a meeting between those two tribes in the 19th century, they couldn't communicate, suggesting obviously that their cultures had been separated for a long period of time. Long enough for language to divert completely so that no understanding between the two cultures could be had.
Yeah, it depends what kind of language they have. So I can see some languages that would be more susceptible to divergence.
Yeah.
So moving away from each other. If you had like a very like the way we use language is quite complex.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're not just saying stuff like I don't know, a lot of the times like you won't tell someone to do something, you just tell them how to do it in other languages, for example. Like you'll say this cup there.
Yeah.
You won't say like I can imagine
or even cup there.
Exactly, right? I can imagine a language that has that kind of build up to it would be quite susceptible to divergence, because all you need is people to sort of mishear the word or whatever.
And then it's...
Exactly. Or use a different word for a similar thing, and then that bleeds across.
And then it gets confused. And
yeah,
all
so
that.
it's hard without really understanding how
they
both the
communicate.
tribes use languages.
Yeah. And then in 1880, so we're jumping ahead quite a lot, Maurice Vidal Portman, some dude, I probably should have checked who that was, but it's just some dude. He visited the island, ventured in, at first found it sort of abandoned, some abandoned huts and stuff. And then he found an elderly couple and 4 children. And he decided, I'm going to greet this tribe by kidnapping these people. So he kidnaps them and takes them to this place called Port Blair. Don't know where that is. And then they all start to get sick. The elderly couple die.
Yeah.
Of course, because of they've not been exposed to the rest of the world's germs and
pathogens.
Stuff. Exactly. And then the children are returned to the island with a load of presents. Sorry, we killed these people. Jesus Christ. Randomly, an escaped convict managed to wash up there, but just got brutally murdered instantly. So that'd be a bit annoying, wouldn't it?
This is a separate case.
Yeah. If you manage to escape prison and you're like, oh my god, I found this like sick deserted island. I can just live here away from everyone, and then a load of tribesmen just fuck you up.
How do they know that? How do they know that that's what happened?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because you could imagine they would know that obviously the guy had escaped. They'd know maybe which sort of direction.
Unless he escaped on some sort of rafty boaty thing and they saw it washed up on the shore, but he wasn't there maybe. Maybe he's still there. Maybe he's the new elder. The leader of the tribe. In 1967, an Indian anthropologist known as Trilonath Pandit landed on the island. Found it deserted at first, so he left sweets, cloth. I put clock in my notes.
Nice.
And buckets and some stuff like that, and then took some items of theirs to study.
But so he did see signs of civilization.
He saw their huts.
Okay.
And he left these sweets and stuff in their huts, but they were deserted. Presumably they'd moved on to a different part of the island. And then a few years later, another group of anthropologists go there to try and film a documentary. So this is probably sort of like 1970-ish. As soon as they get there, their boat is struck by a load of arrows, like a sea of arrows. So they retreat down the beach and start leaving coconuts and stuff like that on the beach. And then they just start getting hit by arrows again. The director gets shot in the leg. And then they escape as the tribes people just bury the gifts. And they're just like, we're not having... You kidnapped like loads of our people. killed 2 of them.
They don't necessarily know that though. They don't know who did what. They
Yeah.
just know that there's an external force that
Force.
keeps turning up and doing strange things. There's probably like all kinds of fables. And
Well,
stuff
that's what one of the questions I was going to ask you is, do you think they understand that we are their species, but just more culturally and technologically developed, or do you think they have some sort of religious or spiritual explanation for who we are and what we're doing?
Yeah, they probably think we're devils or something.
Yeah, and that's why they attack us whenever we go back.
Steal them away. Mm-hmm. Well, I know. It's like when they seen a clip of them seeing a helicopter.
Yeah.
And exactly the first thing they do there is throw spears at it. And I think
That's understandable because that's...
if you've never seen a helicopter before, right?
You could think it's some sort of god, vengeful god or something.
Mechanical bird.
People, I think, is a bit more difficult because they could have humanoid gods in their sort of religious culture. But you could also see them going, well, they're basically just us. Whereas a helicopter, that's just a shape in the sky.
Yeah.
In the same way that if we saw a random shape we didn't recognise, loads of people would assume it's a UFO.
Yeah. Like the flashing lights in Mike Nolan's Long Weekend.
I've not watched it.
No, you haven't.
No.
But there's flashing lights in the sky, mate. Something's happening. I don't know what it is yet, but something's happening.
It's going to lead on to Sassy's series for sure.
No, he didn't talk about it too much. He just like shrugged it off.
Right. In 1981, so about 10 years after Trillanath Pandit visited, a ship crashes. They were attacked. They fought the tribespeople off and they were rescued. During all this time, the anthropologist Pandit kept periodically visiting over about 20 years.
Right.
And then in 1991, he has his first peaceful encounter. A group of tribesmen see him as they're on the beach, and they come over to his boat, even get in his boat and sort of check it out, and he gives them coconuts. There's images of them handing out coconuts to these people.
So they must have seen him. They must be watching then. They must have seen him leaving coconuts and stuff. They must have recognised
That, he's brought us gifts and not interfered with us other than that. Yeah. After that, the Indian government decided enough is enough. We're going to stop studying them so we don't just kill them all off. And then the last information that I'm aware of, I know that 2 fishermen fell asleep on their boat and washed up and they were just killed relatively recently. But then in 2004, that tsunami that happened, the Indian government sent a helicopter over to check if they were still alive, basically, because they were worried that they'd just been wiped out.
after the tsunami.
And they'd just moved to higher ground to avoid it.
Right. There was a Christian missionary who went recently.
Is this the thing you would
Talking about the other day.
Yeah.
I don't remember when it was, but it might have been as recently as 2016.
They chose to go.
Yeah.
Right.
The dude was going there to convert them to Christianity.
Oh, that seems like a bad idea.
Yeah, he got murdered.
Yeah.
But I don't know off the top of my head exactly when that was.
Yeah. He must have been mental.
I think it depends because
I just think that's a very, very questionable decision.
it's a questionable decision, but
No matter what logic you're using, I think it's a questionable decision.
some religious people think in converting people, they're saving them.
Sure. So he might have seen it as his duty.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think one of the questions that I have that I think you'll be quite insightful about is ignoring disease as a factor. Do you think it's a good or a bad idea to have contact with these people? How much contact do you think we should have if we do have some form of contact with them? Obviously, there's good and bad points, but overall, what do you think?
So I mean, ignoring disease, I think there's the potential for technology to make their lives a lot easier. Mm-hmm. Even if you fair enough that in terms of they haven't been exposed to Western pathogens or pathogens that are more prevalent around the globe than are on their island. But at the same time, they probably all have stuff like ringworm. They're probably all getting diseases like that. Yeah. They're probably, stuff like Lyme disease. They're probably not in a very healthy way a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So they would benefit a lot. I think that's the easiest way to look at it, because in terms of us contacting them, the only reason you could say that would realistically be an advantage, obviously there's the appreciation of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
But really, what you'd be looking at is then attempting to expand civilization into their island.
Which could be seen as like the Native American thing, pushing people out.
It's very colonial.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's maybe not the best way to look at. It's maybe not the best way to address looking at whether we really should contact uncontacted peoples.
Yes. Because people always say, like, you have to be respectful to the preservation of their culture and not sort of force Western culture in. But I do understand that to an extent, but on the sort of flip side, is it fair to essentially say, okay, we're going to leave your culture in the dark until the end of time, until you either die out or until you yourselves venture out of your island?
Yeah.
I think when we have all these technological advancements culturally, I think, sure, maintain the history of their culture and document it, but I think just leaving them in the dark it doesn't make much sense to me. Why have these people lived the way we did like thousands of years ago when they could move on to the next step as we did?
Okay, so I've got a couple of things to say about that. The first is, we're not really leaving them in the dark. We could transmit information to them, but in terms of... So let me explain why I think this. They have the capability to discover all the things we've discovered.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, if they invented ways of looking, if they have a mathematical system and invented ways of looking at the world in a similar way to the way physics does and the science does, then they would eventually discover these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that we're leaving them in the dark. It's that maybe they're choosing not to go down that route.
They're sticking how they are.
Exactly. If they were looking for more information, think about it, right? When unknown things come to their island, they try and kill them.
Mm.
So they don't see themselves as, or they're not seeking novel experiences. And that's what science is about. Science is about figuring stuff out, because for science to happen, you have to not know things and you have to want to find them out.
Yes.
If you don't know who these people are who are coming to your island, and then you don't want to actually...
No.
Exactly, then it's maybe not necessarily keeping them in the dark on purpose as such, rather than the way they react.
So you think it's just a case of waiting until they choose to come out on their own? And do you think, obviously, as I said, there was a bit of a scare in 2004 with the tsunami. Do you think they'll just die out then? Because it's estimated that there are between 80 and 150 people, but obviously it could be as many as 500 or as few as like 15. So do you think they'll just die out? And if not, do you think they will eventually, build boats and venture out themselves? Because you do see some tribes in the sort of Peruvian Amazon decide to venture out and start communicating with the surrounding areas.
But I want to address the second point about what you were saying before. So you were talking about keeping them in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
The way technology is sort of affecting society at the minute, and the way they probably live at the minute, where their model for the way they view the world and the way they look at life probably results in them having higher satisfaction than us in Western civilization, where we can get everything immediately. Would you really want to drag a culture like that, that's really sort of hanging on to our evolutionary history and our evolutionary culture in terms of being
and lose that?
Exactly. If you provide them with technology, all of a sudden, do they have the same sort of mental pathologies that we see in the West?
Or do they, not necessarily instantaneously, but become just like us.
Exactly.
And then you like we say, you lose that not the cultural history, but a living representation of that sort of culture.
I think in terms of them leaving, obviously they're completely isolated, aren't they? They're not close to any land masses.
Nothing. Yeah,
it's just a small island in the middle of the ocean, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
So the problem with that is you would either need good luck or advanced seafaring machines, good boats.
Yeah.
And from sort of what we see, especially at North Sentinel Island, is they don't seem to be advanced or interested in advancing their building in that sense. I don't think they
seem to be quite happy just living how they are,
yeah,
don't they?
Yeah.
Just sort of like, for lack of a better word, maybe stoic life.
Yeah. I think there's enough novelty on an island with the biodiversity that probably exists on an island like that.
And I bet because they all have their own jobs, their lives will feel so purposeful.
Yeah.
For the continuation of their family and their tribe.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I suppose that's basically what you were saying about them having more fulfilling lives.
Yeah, right. So in Western culture, if you want to drink, you just go and fill it up before you cup up at the tap. Whereas out there, I don't know exactly how they would do it, but there's got to be someone who goes and collects water,
finds the running water.
Let's say they do boil it, sterilize it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have someone who's looking
finding
after the
water,
fire,
someone
and
who's boiling the water,
exactly,
someone who's checking the water, someone while someone's going to get the food,
exactly,
hunting,
exactly. So everyone has jobs that are really useful to the community.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we've talked a little bit about we talked about the other day about how offset the payoff can be when you take part in an activity. So, for example, let's say you have kids.
Yeah.
Right. It's probably a bad example because it's not specific to Western culture, but let's say you have kids, or go to university, get an education. That's a good one. So.
Oh, is it basically the whole like delayed reward?
Exactly.
Thing?
So you go through education, and it takes probably, even say university, right? University's taken me 3 years to get through. It takes you 3 years to get through.
Yeah.
You're working constantly for 3 years, and your small payoff at the end of 3 years is a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Whereas in this culture,
you work really hard to hunt a pig, and you are rewarded with food for you and your family
immediately the same day.
Yes.
Right. So they're constantly having this reinforcement of their I'm trying to remember the pathway now.
Of the importance of their roles,
but specific to survival.
Yeah.
Whereas we're trying to...
Well, survival isn't really in a Western mind, because it doesn't have to be.
You were talking about whether they would they would move, yeah. So
yeah,
I think there's so much novelty likely present on an island like that, and there's
for
so
them
much
to
for them
just
to do.
Stay
exactly
how they are.
Exactly.
And maybe if their population increases, then there'd be a branching sector of the group who decide we want to venture out,
right.
Which presumably is how humans spread out. They have a small group goes, no, we want to go this way and see what's over there.
Yeah, think about Christopher Columbus.
Yeah,
that's what happened. It was a small group that took over and he settled in the Americas. It's not like they move as a big group and everyone goes and everyone stays together. That's not really what happens.
Yeah.
But I could even think about just, when the tsunami hit. Think about how much novelty a tsunami hit in your island brings to the island.
Yeah.
It probably completely changed the landscape.
And one thing I read up on is I don't know how they knew this again, but it seemed to say that when they checked on them in the helicopter, their jobs had, of course, changed because they have to adapt to, like you're saying, changes in scenery, maybe potentially even different kinds of wildlife. That's a bit of a stretch, but stuff like that. Trees being weaker and maybe falling onto their huts, stuff like that. And then the whole idea of moving to higher ground. Yeah. So that's a good example of a tribe that isn't really interested in connecting, who themselves does not appear to be particularly interested in in contacting us as more developed cultures. Have you? This is a video that I've watched maybe 2 or 3 times over the last sort of 5 years. It's basically a video of a tribe in the Amazon meeting a white man for the first time.
Okay.
Have you heard of this?
I don't think I've seen it, no.
Okay.
I may have done, though, but I don't think so.
Right. So it's basically a filmmaker called Jean-Pierre, not to be confused with the Jean-Pierre from last week, who was the guy who hypothesized the interior ramp in the pyramid.
Small world.
They just have the same name.
Small world. Jean-Pierre, what a name. What a name to be repeated twice in 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah. So the video is called Primitive Forest Tribe Meets Modern Man for the First Time.
Yeah. Okay.
So if anyone wants to listen to it, or watch it rather. So the filmmakers are standing across a river, and the sort of trees, fallen trees across the river.
Across it?
Across it, yeah.
Right.
Connecting the 2 banks.
Like a bridge?
Yes.
Right.
The tribes people are on the other side, and they're sort of looking at them cautiously. The what appears to be the leader has a big sharp stick through the septum of his nose.
Oh, yeah.
And stuff like that, and the sort of stereotypical earrings and stuff like that. So they start making their way across the logs, approaching the filmmakers, leaving the women and the children safely on the other side of the bank. Because apparently they didn't believe that white people existed. They thought white people were like spirits.
Okay.
So Jean-Pierre, the filmmaker guy, is holding his hand out, and they're like ridiculous. You can see on their faces they're so reluctant, like they're actually like reaching out and then pulling the hand back and stuff like that. The director gives them matches, like shows them matches, and they take it and burn. One of them burns the hand, and he's like really confused because he's like, "How have you just made fire out of nothing?"
Right.
And then they shake his hand because I guess they take the gift of instant fire as holy shit.
Well, I mean, if your culture couldn't make fire in a flash like that,
it'd be like magic.
Yeah, literally, and you'd probably be pretty scared. The guy could like just set you all on fire,
just
like straight away,
Yeah.
rather than it taking a few hours.
So they're not
prep.
being cautious; they're being friendly in an attempt to make sure
Scared.
the god does not kill them.
Exactly.
And then they start rubbing his skin, almost like they're trying to rub paint off.
Okay.
They start rubbing his legs, like trying to brush paint off him. Eventually, all the tribesmen calm down, and they invite the white people across the river to meet the rest of their.
So they seem anxious this whole time.
Yes, right. Up until the point that they're rubbing his skin, and they seem to realise, no, you are actually like me, but you just looks a bit different.
Okay.
And they're sort of touching his soft hair and stuff like that, because obviously they'll have quite curly. What would you say, like?
It's humid, and
yeah.
So they'd have sort of mad hair.
Yeah, that's it.
Not going to be well looked after.
Necessarily. He shows them their reflection in a mirror, and they get so confused that they just cover it with a leaf because they don't understand it. The guy just puts a leaf over the mirror because he doesn't want to look. Why
doesn't he just like turn it around? Why does he cover it with the leaf?
I think he's not holding it at the time.
Okay.
Jean-Pierre's holding it up to him. And then Jean-Pierre shows him his steel machete and starts sort of whacking this log that's on the floor. And then they basically mimic what he's doing with their stone axes.
Okay.
And they're sort of comparing the mark it makes on the wood. And it sort of says in the video that depending on how you look at it, you could see that as them skipping the Bronze Age all the way up to the Steel Age.
Right. Because they've got hitting the tree with like sort of stone hatchets.
Yeah. Right, so they're skipping any like mining stuff, and they're going straight to seeing these really refined tools.
Yeah. Yeah. At least in terms of their ideas, not necessarily in terms of what they're doing and what they're preparing. But I see what you mean.
Then they give the tribespeople rice. They don't like it until he's put a load of salt on it. It's like me. I need so much salt on anything I eat. And he starts banging his head. Has some rice. Bangs his head with his fist. And they worked out that means good. That's a hand gesture to mean good. Because then they all start trying it.
Oh, okay.
Whacking their head like that. And it's sort of, I think the most fascinating thing for me was seeing them interact with modern technology, like the cameras. Because they can't, they clearly, based on seeing their facial expressions, they clearly know there's a purpose that they don't understand.
Right.
But even understanding that this is a thing with a purpose, but they don't understand it, and looking at it to try and work out what the purpose is.
Yeah, right.
It's a really fascinating thing to see.
Yeah, it's well, they see I wonder then if they are constantly sort of developing new technologies, but it's just very primitive technologies.
Yeah, at a slower rate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or just their materials and their refinement. That's what it is. They don't develop refining techniques for their materials. They're just building using raw materials, and they're not finding ways to further refine their building materials. So they can't actually build, like, that's sort of what I was getting at with the Steel Age thing. Like they don't have forges and they don't have refineries, and they're not building things that could make that kind of stuff. Yeah.
But presumably they don't even understand mining.
Yeah, right.
Because there's what need would they have? Oh, there's a slightly different coloured rock. I have no use for that, because they can't refine it into a tool.
No, they'll probably just break it up and have it because it looks pretty. Anything.
Yeah. So that's an example of a tribe that once a situation is provided to them where they are meeting people from the Western world, that they are accepting of it. So we've had one sort of tribe who seems uninterested, one tribe who, when confronted with the idea, are willing to, what would you say, sort of buy into that? Not buy into that, but sort of, you know what I mean? Yeah.
They're more open to the idea of strangers.
Yeah.
What do you think about the idea that the reason the North Sentinelese are less open to it is because specifically they've seen people arrive from the sea, whereas obviously this encounter that you're talking about,
it's happened in the
forest.
Yeah.
Right. So whereas one is obviously a group of people coming from outside, the other
is people that are already inside.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think now that you've mentioned that, thinking about it, the best sort of comparison you could draw from the North Sentinelese is people coming in through the ocean, people coming down from space. That's the best sort of, because presumably they don't even understand that there's anything beyond the sea, but depending on how far the sea spans away.
Yeah, and whether they can see other islands.
Yes. So they could genuinely think, oh, things have appeared from nothing.
Exactly.
And now they've taken our family. They've not come back.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And then there's one other interesting tribe, and this is sort of like the other opposite end of being completely uninterested. This is a tribe that seemed to seek out joining a more developed society. So this is a tribe in the Peruvian Amazon who, like I say, actually tried to break out and contact modern civilization. They're called the Sapanawa tribe. And there's a video of them emerging from the forest. All they've got on is like a thin material belt and then like a pouch to cover their
like a loincloth, basically.
Basically, yeah. And they sort of come out, and obviously at first there was no communication because there can't be. But eventually they translated it and basically saying, oh, there are bad people over there, don't go down there. Maybe you are good, maybe you will help us. But obviously, like I say, they couldn't communicate at the time, so that has been translated afterwards.
Right.
And then once seeing people in clothes, for example, they wanted clothes, and the leader of the tribe said they felt ashamed. Once seeing people in clothes, they felt ashamed to be naked. They said,
really
we don't want to be naked anymore.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Because you wouldn't think it'd just be a difference. There wouldn't be any. You wouldn't. Seeing other people in clothes wouldn't make you feel ashamed to not be in clothes just because you've seen other people in clothes. Yeah,
it sort of calls into question this idea that we've been sort of socially engineered to think that nudity is a bad thing.
Yeah.
When you encounter a culture that actually see clothes for the first time, and they say, oh, that's what we've been looking for, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, they started stealing clothes, and obviously disease and stuff and pathogens. Yeah, right. The people that they were stealing from were these anthropologists were trying to be, no, put it down. But they didn't understand, so they'd sort of take the clothes. And they came out looking for help because they were being attacked by who they think is the Peruvian military. They were just getting attacked, like their villagers were just getting they were killing them for fun.
What?
That's what they said to these people. It could have been just like bandits or something like that.
Right.
But they said they were talking on walkie-talkies and stuff like that. So
And
that's
they wouldn't have seen that's the only way. Like, you have to believe what they're saying, because they wouldn't have seen the technology any other way
before. And then now they work with an organization. I can't remember what the organization's called, but they provide them with clothes and tools, but they still largely live how they did before. And I think that's quite a good success story of reaching a middle ground between, like you were saying, helping them in ways that would genuinely be useful to them without sacrificing who they are and what they're about as a culture.
Yeah, I think probably the optimal solution would be making first contact, at least, just gauge their reactions, and then allowing them to send ambassadors, rather than being like, oh, here are the things that we can give you. Allowing them to come to more advanced civilization and say, we want to learn this, we want to do this. I know there are one or two tribes that do have people who leave and they use computers and they do communicate with the outside world. I think there's a couple with like sort of actually like fairly popular sort of Twitter accounts or Instagram accounts where they communicate what life is like for them to the outside world. And
then vice versa.
Yeah.
To an extent.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably the optimal solution, is allowing them to reach out when they want things rather than pushing things onto them.
Yeah, and I think probably the reason that this worked so well and that there was no major misunderstanding that could led to deaths of either the tribes people or the people that they were reaching out to is the fact that they came out when they needed help. It wasn't forced upon them. They didn't come out just because they were asking for help, and then that started a dialogue between these two vastly different cultures.
Right.
So I think if the North Sentinelese are ever going to develop some form of long-standing communication with the rest of the world, it has to be on them.
Right. Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. They're the limiting factor.
Yeah. So the sort of unrelated to what we've spoken about so far, but one thing that's quite common in a lot of Amazonian tribes is the ritual use of drugs.
Or just rituals in general, ceremony in general.
Yeah. There's a drug called Ayahuasca, which is...
Well, it's a preparation of a drug. It's not a drug itself.
It's like a tea, isn't it? It's a strong psychedelic concoction made up of various sort of vines and plants and stuff. The active component is dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, which comes from the shrub Psychotria viridis, which I didn't know.
There's more than that.
Yeah, there's other plants that also... Isn't it in our bodies, human bodies?
As far as I can see from the research, that's not been proven. I've heard laymen claim that it has been found in human liver.
Right.
I've never read a study that says that.
There was some stuff a while ago about the idea of DMT being the thing that causes these afterlife experiences when you legally die.
Or near-death experiences as well. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
In terms of it flooding your brain as you are in this deathly experience.
Yeah. Like I say, I've heard... And the thing is as well, it's always people that are... and I think we might... no, we won't. Maybe next week. I think we might come on to this at some point soon. It's always people who are very pushy about their drug narrative that say that it's been found in the human body. And a lot of the times they're pushing for the idea that how can you make a drug legal when the human body produces it?
Yeah, it's people trying to clutch at straws for any reason for it to not be illegal.
Yeah. I'm aware that it's been found in rodents.
Rats and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it causes vivid visual and auditory hallucinations. And it's generally used in the context of ritualistic use as a treasured sacrament, drank in tea as medicine for both the body and the mind. It causes intense vomiting and diarrhea, which, while unpleasant to us, would make sense because it would purge your body. It could purge your body of parasites and worms and stuff that are in your body.
Yeah, they even when Westerners go and participate in ceremonies, they say that it feels like the vomiting, they call it purging. It feels like they are actually cleansing themselves.
Yeah, rather than just like getting rid of bile and stuff.
Exactly.
It feels like they're cleansing both their soul and their body.
Exactly, that's what you hear from people. Yeah.
You'd have a tribal shaman to guide you through it. But that doesn't always go perfectly. I know you've seen a few instances or seen a few videos of where people have made questionable decisions to react to bad reactions to taking ayahuasca.
Yeah, but I think the main problem there is likely the westernization of the ceremony. So it's very sort of trendy right now.
Yes.
So
to go out to Peru or somewhere in a forest and
what happens when something gets popular? Everyone wants to sell it. So the problem is,
so how it is done might be changed to make it more attractive to Western people.
Well, you're likely seeing people who aren't
shamans,
traditional cultural people
trying to get money to do it. Sure.
And all you have to do, because it's legal out there, you just have to open a center.
Yeah.
Simple.
What sort of things have you seen in those videos? What bad things? Because I think there's one or two that we've spoken about.
So there's always, a lot of the time there's this, or sometimes they have this obsession with water, and if someone's having a bad experience, that water is the way to deal with it. So a lot of the times they'll sort of splash people's face. These people who don't necessarily know what they're doing, they'll put water down people's faces while they're basically unconscious. Yeah. There's quite a few stories about near misses where people come back from the ceremony and they're talking about how their body reacted to the drug, and basically the response from the shaman when they talk about it wasn't the correct response. So people turning blue who clearly can't breathe, stuff like that. People who are having sort of severe hypertension, so high blood pressure, and they're not being dealt with properly. People who are clearly struggling with respiration, stuff like that. And because these people don't have medical training, that's the more likely one for me in terms of if you get a legitimate sort of traditional shaman, is they don't have the medical experience to know
to save you if you need
what's good or what's bad. Exactly. And you're probably so far away from a really good hospital that you may be not going to get there if someone does say, right, enough, we need to go do something about this.
There was obviously one video that you and I watched where there was a man who did it, and as he sort of goes into it, he sort of says, "Oh, I love you guys," but it's in a really, he's having a hard time, and we discussed this, and you can tell by the way he says it, that's not him having a spiritual, loving experience. That's him trying so hard to hold on to any positive thought that could stop it going sour.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it certainly looked that way.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think this is the sort of last thing I wanted to talk about, and this is the thing that you had no idea that we were going to talk about. That I decided to throw in.
Did it move away from ceremonial drug use? Because there's.
What is if you've got more information?
Oh well, obviously they actually, something that's quite common, something that people don't really think about, is they ritually use a lot of tobacco species.
Yes.
A lot of the time. So even during Aya ceremony, they'll use, I can't remember the name of the tobacco that they actually use, but they'll waft tobacco, and they have this idea that it's pushing evil spirits away from the ceremony.
The area.
And obviously it's interesting to me that specifically the things that they're using. So this tobacco, right? A lot of the time they'll burn it like incense. It's not a consumed drug, but it's interesting to me that it's still psychoactive. It's interesting to me that even though they're not using it in a traditionally, a way that drugs are traditionally used, i.e. consumption, direct consumption, it's interesting to me that they're still using a psychoactive drug for that.
Yeah.
incense, whereas in the West a lot of the time, or
It's just smelly things.
incense is just incense.
Yeah,
exactly.
sure. But I suppose it'd be difficult to find things that are just smelly in
I think you'd be
that
surprised in a
culture.
rainforest.
I suppose there's a wide...
Well, what you have to think about is they make this tea, right? And they just so happen, through years of experimentation, they just so happen to have found, because DMT is not orally bioavailable on its own. It gets destroyed by monoamine oxidase enzymes. And you were talking about Psychotria viridis, so that's a DMT containing shrub, I believe.
Yeah.
And then they normally have they'll have a vine, Banisteriopsis caapi, and that contains inhibitors of this enzyme that destroys the DMT.
So it allows the DMT to be consumed through the stomach.
Exactly.
Sure.
So I understand where you're coming from about them maybe struggling to find things that
There's
smell.
such an incredibly... It's such a biologically or ecologically diverse place.
Yeah.
Probably one of the most ecologically diverse places in the entire world.
Yeah.
That of course there's going to be some things there that could serve that purpose.
And the fact that they've tried enough things to eventually arrive upon this concoction that produces these visions.
Quite a complex concoction of that.
Yeah. Exactly. So that they
must have a wide understanding of a lot of the things that are around them.
Or at least they try a lot of things. At least they're highly experimental with the things that they do find around them.
Stoned ape theory.
Okay.
So could you just sort of give a rough rundown of what that is?
Okay, so stoned ape is a theory, I think, initially proposed by Terence McKenna, that states that during human development, evolutionary development, at some point while we were hunter-gatherers, there's this move in the fossil records from having this, it's something stupid, like a doubling of the size of the brain in like 100,000 years. I don't know the exact numbers. And this theory by Terence McKenna is that as we moved away from the forest and towards areas that were more lived in by more diverse trees and livestock, that basically humans have always had this relationship with mushrooms because they're so abundant. They're everywhere. It's the idea that as this was happening, as we're moving away from the sort of canopies, we're diversifying our food intake into sort of mushrooms and stuff like that. And that the incorporation of mushrooms, and specifically psychedelic mushrooms, into the diet resulted in something that produced this doubling in brain size across a small period of time.
So to sort of dumb it down in its simplest form, it's the notion that psychedelics had a strong involvement in the intense development of our brains. See, the way that Terence McKenna put it forward, I don't agree with. I don't think it's accurate. I do think it's possible that psychedelic drugs maybe had a hand in allowing us to develop language in the way that we have. Spoken language specifically, or mainly. Just because of the way you hear it expanding people's minds and stuff like that, and allows people to conceptualize things that maybe they wouldn't have done otherwise.
Okay.
But further than that, I can't. Technology and language, I think those are the two things that it could have had something to do with.
Right.
In terms of explaining a doubling in brain size, I can't understand these substances being able to have that effect on your genes.
Yeah, okay. So there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about. I think about this sometimes, quite a lot.
Sometimes quite a lot.
I think about it sometimes, and then when I think about it for an extended period of time. Okay, so the mechanism. Okay, so first off, as far as I'm aware, the generally accepted explanation for the brain size change is the introduction of fire to human culture. So in cooking meat and stuff like that, you make the nutrients a lot more easy to digest and a lot more sort of immediately bioavailable.
Yeah.
Which means you're wasting less energy on digestion.
So you can put
Use
that elsewhere.
more on anabolic mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the generally accepted explanation. Now, the thing about genetics that people don't realize is there are mechanisms for environmental factors to influence genetics. That's not me saying that there are genetic factors and there are environmental factors that affect traits. That's me saying the environment can affect genetics.
Mm-hmm. Just in a more indirect way.
What happens is there are these things called histones that are wound around DNA. And basically, through chemical reactions to these histones, acetylation and methylation, doesn't really matter. But they can tighten around the DNA or they can unwind and loosen around the DNA.
Right.
So the tighter a histone is around the DNA at any point, the less likely that is to be transcribed and expressed. So the only mechanism here that could possibly point to a role in terms of, like you're saying, genetic alterations to increase brain size would be that these psychedelic mushrooms have some impact on the histone winding of DNA. Whether that's true or not, it remains to be seen. I mean, I think we'll be able, even if it's just a case of artificially engineering DNA with histones that are preventing transcription of brain-related growth factors. I think there'll be a way to find that out. I do think there'll be a way to find that out.
Yeah.
Do I think it's likely to explain something that's...
I just think it's too drastic a change in too short a period of time to be explained through...
solely by drugs, at
Yes.
least. Yeah, I can understand... I can get on with the fact that language was developing and there was the sort of explosion of tool usage, and I can understand psychedelics being a catalyst for tool usage and
creativity.
Maybe language. I think language is a bit of a stretch. I think when you see videos of people who've consumed psychedelic drugs, they're clearly having trouble communicating. Doesn't make communication easier. It makes communication much more difficult.
Yeah.
The caveat to that is there's something interesting about language in the fact that language is quite synesthetic, right? So we have things like onomatopoeia. Mm-hmm. So we have clap because they sound the same.
Or whoosh.
Exactly, right? I can imagine that introduction to psychedelic drugs could catalyze an increased use of what I am calling here synesthetic language, which would then result in easier communication outside of the drug use because you're using these sort of metaphors and so it could be that, but I don't necessarily buy the theory that much. I think it's much more likely to be to do with the increased use of tools, the increased use of fire to prepare food, the easier time that we have.
It just marks a point in our evolution.
Yeah.
The growth of the brain. A lot of changes are coming into in the way that our culture functions and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think, it's not unlikely that actually before this point, people were, at least some cultures had some access and interaction with psychedelic mushrooms and psychedelic drugs.
Well, it's like ayahuasca. That presumably goes back years and years and years and years and years.
It's hard to say because the tradition is only going to be oral. So 3 generations to an oral tradition is millennia ago, or it could be because no one around has heard that, has seen that story happening.
Sure.
So that's the tough thing about anthropologists diving into tribal cultures interacting with different aspects of their environment is it can be quite difficult to get a good idea of actually when things happened, because you're relying on the word of other people, whereas in Western culture we tend to have like written records and stuff like that. They don't.
It's harder to communicate knowledge down multiple generations when you don't have
Exactly.
an in-depth way of
Storing information.
exactly, be it computers or books,
Yeah, exactly.
which a lot of these cultures have neither of those.
Yeah, so it's like, I mean, just for a good example on this, you know, a lot of people think, you know, like peyote, so mescaline-containing cactuses, cacti.
They're the cacti that you can find on GTA 5, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Well, I think it's San Pedro.
Oh, right.
On GTA 5. I think it's San Pedro on GTA 5. I'm going to say that again because I think I was too far away from the microphone.
Wow.
So people think, people who sort of skirt around the edge of drug culture rather than really diving into it and being interested in how these things have developed, people would probably think that the use of DMT containing toads with 5-MeO-DMT containing in the venom, people would think that that's been around for ages, especially because of the way it's talked about in the culture that it's done. It's talked about as a historical religious sacrament. That probably started 60 years ago, 70 years ago.
Yeah.
But what people think is that
it's been around for
ages.
Yeah.
And it's just because of, you even go to some of the sort of the more traditional communities that it's used in, and they think it's been around for ages as well, because of this oral tradition, or, you know, so it's hard to tell when things stretch back to when they were first started sort of being used for ceremonial usage, when they were first started being used for recreational usage. If it's anything, if psychedelics have influenced our evolution at all, I would imagine it's mushrooms that have caused it.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's accurate, like I say, remains to be seen. But I do think there are ways we could test that theory. 100% hypothesis, really. There's ways we could test that hypothesis. And I think we'll see. We'll see, hopefully, because there's the psychedelic research is on the uptick at the minute, obviously, for uses specifically to do with mental health. I think as they continue to be researched, they'll be seen to have positive. I do think they will be seen to have positive impacts on brain function.
Well, that's obviously what we're talking about next week.
Yeah.
In terms of recreational drugs and how they can be used medicinally rather than recreationally.
Yeah.
The ending clush.
Let's dive into
Tune in next time to find out.